this week's parsha, which is the portion of Shmini, and it was on the 8th day. This is the day where Aaron and his sons were installed to be the Kohanim. Going forward, only they would be the ones to be qualified to officiate in the Mishkan and ultimately in the Beis Hamikdash, in the temple. The first 7 days of the Mishkan was erected and dismantled every day. The one who officiated was Moshe. He acted as if he was the priest. He was instructed by God to bring those particular sacrifices to qualify and to inaugurate the Mishkan and to qualify Aaron and his sons. They should be worthy and be atoned to be qualified to officiate on the 8th day. On the 8th day, they were installed to be the priests, the Kohanim. Rashi cites the Midrash that the 8th day itself was Rosh Chodesh Nisan. There's an argument in the Talmud, in the Gemara, when did God create the world? Did he create the world in Nisan? Or did he create the world in Tishrei when we celebrate Rosh Hashanah? But according to the opinion that the world was created in Nisan, the Mishkan was inaugurated and took on a permanent status on Rosh Chodesh Nisan, on the first day of Nisan. The divine presence, known as the Shekhinah, entered into the Mishkan on Rosh Chodesh Nisan, which is very interesting. The portion begins, Vayihi Bayom HaShmini, and it was on the 8th day. The Gemara tells us that the joy that God had on this day was the equivalent of the joy that he had when initially he created the world. As it says, Vayihi Bayom HaShmini, and it was on the day, the 8th day, Vayihi Bayom. We find that same word, Vayihi, mentioned multiple times during the 7 days of creation. Vayihi Erev, there was evening and there was morning, it was 1 day, it was 2 days, throughout the process of creation, which was a 7-day creation. That was the process. So just as it says, Vayihi, and it was, at the very beginning of creation, identically here it says, Vayihi Bayom HaShmini, it was on the 8th day. The same joy that God initially had when he created the world, again, he has that level of joy when Aaron and his children are being installed to be the priests. The question is why? Creation, we understand. It's ex nihilo. Nothing pre-existed creation. This is the intent of creation. As David HaMelech says, as King David says in Psalms, Olam Chesed Yiboneh, the concept behind creation is loving kindness. God had no reason other than purely out of chesed to give man the opportunity that if he should make the right decision, he's the ultimate beneficiary. So it makes good sense why God had such joy. But the Mishkan, the day that Aaron and his sons were installed to be the Kohanim, why should he have the equivalent of that joy? We'd once mentioned the name of the Shaloch HaKadosh, the Holy Shaloch, that we find, the Torah tells us that the priests, the Kohanim, are only qualified to officiate if they wear their priestly vestments. if they don't wear their priestly vestments, they're not qualified. The service is not valid. The high priest has 8 vestments. The ordinary Kohen has 4 vestments. And the Torah refers to the priestly vestments as kavod and tiferes. It's for honor and glory if he officiates in those vestments. So he explains that initially the vestment of the human being was his body, was his physicality. And the soul is the essence of the person. The soul is cloaked with the body. So the vestment of the soul is the body. However, when Adam ate of the tree of knowledge, which was good and evil, and he integrated into his being something that was absolutely evil, he putrefied the body. The body was no longer qualified to be the vestment, to serve God. Therefore, Aaron and his sons, who were the Kohanim, who were the priests, God prescribed vestments with the specifications, how they must be made, what they look like, the materials that go into the vestments, because that itself replaces the body, which is the vestment for the soul. Aaron and his sons, when they begin officiating, they have to wear those spiritual vestments. The priestly vestments are consecrated. It has holiness, similar to Adam's body initially, before he ate of the tree of knowledge. It had innate holiness because it was pure. It was created by God. The initial intent of creation was that God's presence should be on the terrestrial level, not on the celestial level. The celestial, those are the angels. The angels do not have choice. They cannot act any differently than God instructs them and dictates to them. They have no evil inclination, although they're considered intelligent beings. The human being, on the other hand, his objective is to make choices every moment of his life. And based on those choices, that will determine the degree of relationship which the human being has with God. Therefore, what is considered the ultimate and the objective and the focal of creation, that's the human being. God wants to be with the human being. He is the primary intent of creation. Everything else is only to facilitate his objective to perfect himself. Therefore, what was the original intent of where the divine presence was meant to be? On the terrestrial level. But because Adam ate of the tree of knowledge, God's presence ascended and detached itself from this existence. Now, finally, after all these years, God is able to re-enter into existence, into the Mishkan, as he says, make for me a sanctuary so that I should dwell in your midst. Vayhi b'yom hashmini, and this was on the 8th day, when Aaron and his sons, they wore those priestly vestments, which was the equivalent of the vestment of Adam's body initially before he ate of the tree of knowledge. And he's beginning to officiate. And God is entering again into existence, which was the ultimate initial intent of creation. Therefore, God's joy on the 8th day, which according to one opinion was the day of creation because the world was created in Nisan, it's no less than the joy that God had when initially he created the world.